Okay, well, the mission of the Policy Circle is to inform women on issues and so that they can take ownership of solutions in their communities. The Policy Circle's summit this year is focused on the confluence of essentials, which is power, water, and leadership. So, our goal today, and my guest is Congresswoman Deb Dingell from Michigan, is to understand how the federal policies impact water and power in our communities. And Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us today. As far as I'd love to go take a step back and explain what is the role of Congress as it relates to power generation, transmission, distribution, and as well as to water infrastructure. If you could give us an overview of that, that'd be great.
Um, Congress plays a really critical role in creating federal policies. I'm somebody, you could talk to me about water all the time. I think water is a basic human right. I believe that Congress has got a very critical role to play in creating policies that move innovation and technology forward, to invest in clean energy and water infrastructure, as well as collaborating with other policymakers in the administration to make sure we're addressing problems that we need to address. So on water, I come from the state of Michigan. Flint had children being poisoned by lead in their water. Congress, it took too long, was working with EPA. There were failures at both the federal and the state level to address problems that needed to be done. We passed legislation at the federal level to try to ensure that no community would ever experience what Flint experienced again. Unfortunately, we're still seeing it happen. And so I'm pushing EPA very hard in the Congress would require the elimination of lead in all pipes, water pipes in this country. There was a study that was done in October, or that was released by the Pediatric JAMA, that showed that 50% of all children whose blood was tested in this country have lead in their blood. That's unacceptable. We know what happens to a child when they have lead in their blood. And I think Congress has got a very serious responsibility to address issues like this, to ensure that everybody in this country has access to clean and safe drinking water. But then you talk about energy as well. I mean, these are really complicated issues. Global climate's real. We know it. When you see the wildfires, you see the hurricanes. I had 8 floods in my city, the city in which I live this summer. We've got a responsibility to future generations to reduce carbon emissions, to address methane, so many other issues. And that means, again, Congress has a responsibility to look at policies that are going to protect future generations.
Well, you mentioned a little bit how you were pushing the APA. So Congress is responsible for oversight of agencies. You mentioned the APA. What other agencies are involved in energy? And what are their mandates? And how does your committee, you're a seated member of the House Committee on Energy, exert its oversight on those agencies?
Oversight is, I think, one of the most serious responsibilities that Congress has. So you keep people accountable in the jobs. We need to know what they're doing and that they're actually implementing the law. EPA is critical on water, but the Department of Energy would obviously, on the energy front, have responsibility. We want to make sure that they're investing in new technologies. They're overseeing many of the rules and regulations that we've done. But interestingly, I come from the state of Michigan. It's the car state. It's the vehicle state. It's now the state. It put the world on wheels, and now I think of it as the mobility industry. The Department of Transportation is the agency that actually oversees that in EPA. So we need to work with all of the agencies to ensure that the policies we are passing to try to protect in our country, all Americans, is actually being implemented and being done in the right way.
And it's interesting, this coordination of agencies, so the oversight is not just just with one agency on one topic, but also ensuring that there's collaborations and effectiveness across the agencies. Now, when you pass legislation, how does Congress and yourself balance national security, economic stability, energy independence, and mandates for more renewables or net zero emissions? How do you balance it? How do you think about it?
It's proven that renewable energy is incredibly valuable when it comes to national security. But again, oil is obviously something that's very important to the global economy. And I'm not old, but I'm seasoned. And I remember when there were long gas lines in this country, the global marketplace was charging outrageous sums of money for the cost of oil. People were paying for it every day. It was impacting their incomes, but it also very much impacted our national security and our dependence upon foreign oil. So what we need to be is to be energy independent. And I think that that's one of the things that renewables are something that is here in this country. We are not dependent on foreign countries for that source. And we also need to be making sure that our power grid is strong, is not vulnerable to cyber attacks, etc. And these are all issues that the Congress has a very serious responsibility to be looking at.
When we look at the energy challenges that are unfolding in Europe, for instance, where the prices are getting higher, there's supply issues. And you've touched on this a little bit, what is Congress doing to ensure that something like that doesn't happen in the U.S. to kind of balance the portfolio of energy sources?
Again, I think it's one of the most important things we do. Before I came I'm from Michigan. Before I came to the Congress, I worked for General Motors for 3 decades. And I know how important energy is, period. So the Congress has got a responsibility to be addressing global climate change. So one of the most important things that happened this year, by the way, is something that I worked very hard on with the President of the United States, with the auto companies, the environmentalists, and the unions, which was to come up with a voluntary agreement that this country will target by the year 2030, 50% sales of electric vehicles. By targeting those electric vehicles, we're reducing carbon emissions 60% over where we are today. But again, we're lessening our dependence on foreign oil. The cost of electricity when it's with renewables is far less than what the cost of gasoline is. And we need to be working on reducing consumer costs, energy independence, and not being dependent upon other countries. It's just a beginning of some of the issues that we are looking at in terms of federal public policy.
And I think, resilience and reliability, during this time until renewables are fully dependable is also a consideration to balance things out. If we go back to water, you touch on Congress' role as it relates to water quality. What about water conservation and distribution? And you touched on this, but coming from Michigan, again, I think in Benton Harbor, there are some issues with contaminated infrastructure. How do we ensure that it doesn't repeat itself, these situations in Flint, now Benton Harbor, and elsewhere? Where are we at in terms of the water infrastructure?
I think it's one of the most important responsibilities we have. We have 2 bills that the Congress is considering right now. One is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, and the other is the Build Back Better bill. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill has some dollars in it to remove lead from pipes. But I have fought very hard to ensure that we have enough money in there to get the lead out of every pipe in this country, because I think that everybody's got a right to clean and safe drinking water. But, one of the other problems we have is when the pandemic began, the scientists around the world told us the most important thing you could do is to wash your hands, to have good public health sanitation, and yet we were turning the water off in many homes in this country. And I fought very hard to have a ban on water turnoffs and for water affordability. So that's been another critical issue that we've all been working on in both of these bills. And, as we talk about water, I think it's also important. I come from a region that is called the Great Lakes. We've got more than 20% of the fresh water in the world is from the region that I'm in. And it was very polluted for a very long time. People were putting human waste. We had mercury. Manufacturers were just excreting their waste into the water. And we have to work to make sure people's water is clean. The Clean Water Act did that in the 60s. But we still have, for instance, a contaminant that 98% of us have in our blood, PFAS chemicals. We still don't have a safe drinking water standard in this country. So there are still chemicals that we know are polluting the waters. And this is something we need to address every day. You can't believe we're still fighting for clean water for every human in many different ways. But these are very important responsibilities of the Congress. And then you also, when you talk about conservation, I could talk about water forever. When you talk about conservation, we had floods in my district, as I mentioned before, 8 floods, but yet you've got rivers that are drying up in the Colorado River. California has droughts every summer. So, and there are other countries around the world that don't have the abundance of water the way that we do right now in the Great Lakes. So we do need to talk about water conservation measures and not just be looking at public policy for the next week, month, or year, but for decades down the road, because we've got to worry about our children as well.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Dingell, to share your thoughts here and especially your perspective on water, since it's a big dimension of our summit. So thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it. And